Welcome to the Great Loop Radio podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Rousseau. I'm the director of AGLCA. Today we're going to talk about sound signals, which is an important part of the rules of the road. It's also important for safety, and I think it is largely misunderstood or not learned or not implemented by recreational boaters, and it's certainly something that I myself could use a refresher on. So we are going to bring back Robert Rice. If you're a regular listener, you know Robert because he joins us quite frequently to talk about some of the safety things we all need to know for the Great Loop. We'll bring in Rob in just a moment, but first, as always, I'd like to take a moment to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Kathy All. She is a certified financial planner with Edward Jones, Great Loop Yacht Sales, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And with the sponsor recognition done, I'd like to officially welcome Robert Rice back to the podcast. Rob, thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
And I appreciate you always coming to me with some great safety topics, and this is certainly one of them that we have not covered before. Why don't we start, for those who maybe are not regular listeners to our podcast, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've been boating for, 20, 25 years. My daughter got me involved. She joined a Girl Scout, a very large, very active, and very well done Girl Scout sailing program. She was, 11. And I got sucked into that. I started doing things with them because I felt like I needed to help make the program work for her and for her friends in the program. And from there, I ended up as a sailing instructor for the Girl Scout program. I have 5, I think, sailing instructor qualifications from the American Sailing Association. I'm a boating safety instructor for the U.S. Coast Guard and for Texas Parks and Wildlife. And I'm a member of the Coast Guard's unpaid volunteer component, the Coast Guard Auxiliary. That's a sort of uniquely Coast Guard organization. We're really members of the Coast Guard, but in a different way from the active duty and reserve component military members. We're always unpaid, but we have the opportunity to do all kinds of important things. And a big piece of what the Coast Guard Auxiliary does is recreational boater safety education and outreach.
And we thank you for your activity in that great organization who supports loopers in so many ways, from doing vessel safety checks at our events to teaching the basic boating safety course at our events. So we thank you for your involvement with them. We've got lots of members who are involved. Right. Great organization. But so let's talk about today's topic, which is sound signals. As I mentioned in the intro, it's part of the rules of the road, but for recreational boaters, probably something that a lot of us don't actually see in practice out there. So give us the big picture first.
Yeah, so my group's experience in teaching boating safety classes is the vast majority of recreational boaters have no idea that there are rules of the road, really. Certainly no idea about the details of the rules, only the fuzziest notion of whether those rules might apply to a recreational vessel, and definitely no idea about sound signals or things we're not going to talk about today, lights and day shapes. Those are 2 completely even more obscure topics for which there's some important things. Maybe we'll do an episode on lights and day shapes another time.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. But
yeah,
for today, yeah, let's dig into the sound
we can only do
signals.
so much in one episode.
Exactly.
So what we're going to talk about are sound signals, and those sound signals are required under the navigational rules. And the navigation rules apply to all vessels. And vessel is pretty much what you'd expect. Anything that looks like a boat and moves about on the water is going to be a vessel. And for sure, recreational boats, including looper boats, are definitely vessels covered by the navigation rules. The rule book, and we're going to post a link to the official U.S. Coast Guard navigation rules on the website.
Mm-hmm.
But the rule book has 2 sets of rules in there, an international set and an inland set. The inland set is what's going to apply to the vast majority of the loop route, short, say, of the hop, skip, and a jump diagonally across the Gulf, or maybe if you go offshore. On the other hand, if you're in those international waters, you're relatively less likely to be around other vessels where you're going to have to worry about sound signals. So we're going to focus today on specifically on the inland rules, and we're not going to cover all the sound signals. We're going to cover the ones that I think are probably the most important for recreational boaters to think about. There are two kinds. There's some maneuvering signals. I'm about to make a maneuver, and there's some restricted visibility. Everybody talks about as fog signals, and that's kind of what they are. We're going to talk about those two categories of sound signals. Can't cover all the sound signals. There's a bunch of them. This topic was sort of top of mind for me. I'm involved in the Coast Guard Auxiliary's boat crew program, and I've done the first level qualification, and I'm working on the second level, and that's required some study on the navigation rules in a pretty serious way. Because to get that second level qualification, I have to take a proctored closed book U.S. Coast Guard's own navigation rules exam, which is a bear.
I bet.
So I have done the deep dive in this stuff and refreshed my recollection on a bunch of things I'd learned before, but was less than clear on. And this stuff is pretty nitpicky and detailed, but it's actually pretty important. So we're going to talk about the important stuff, the most important stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
But just to be completely clear, sound signals are required for recreational
Absolutely.
vessels, correct?
Yeah. And this is really much the same idea as if you're driving on the streets, roads, or highways. Every car has an obligation to use turn signals if you're changing lanes. Every car's got an obligation to stop at the stop sign. You can't treat the stop sign as a mere suggestion. And if you ignore those rules of the road for cars and get yourself into an accident, you're going to be at fault. And it's really the same kind of issues here. Despite the fact that the vast majority of recreational boaters have no idea about sound signals, if you get yourself involved in a collision with another vessel and you should have understood or should have used sound signals but didn't, it's extremely likely you're going to be at least in part at fault for that collision. So really the same idea as rules of the road. So it's just as it's no answer to say, well, everybody else only slows down for stop signs, doesn't actually stop. You can't say that here either. The rules exist, and I think it's really important to know some of these. And we're going to talk about the ones that I think are probably the most important for loopers to know something about, be aware of, to help keep themselves safe and keep everybody around them safe.
Excellent. So let's start with the basics. The requirements are to carry a sound producing device, first of all, so you can do these sound signals. So let's start there.
Yeah, and it's actually a pretty easy requirement. And I will caution everybody, that if you poke around in the internet, you're going to come on articles and things that say looper-sized boats have to have a bell. And that is just flat wrong. That used to be the rule years ago. Today's rule is a vessel up to 20 meters in length, so roughly 65 feet, is required only to carry a horn. The bell requirement applies only above 20 meters, that is 65 feet or so, are you required to bell. And those bells are not cheap, it's a lot of bronze, it's expensive. You go buy one at West Marine, it's probably $400 or $500-ish. It's some pretty serious money, but the rules are really clear. So Rule 33A of the inland rules says that a vessel of 12 meters or more in length has to have a whistle, and the whistle here basically means any kind of efficient sound producing device that can make the kinds of signals we're talking about. And only a vessel over 20 meters has to have a bell. Now, the whistle we're talking about, the horn we're talking about, could be something that's wired into your boat, sort of the equivalent of your car's horn, a button you can push and it toots. It can also be a canned air horn. That canned air horn from the marine supply store is, I don't know, $5 or $6. It lasts forever. The can probably rusts before you use it all up. I think it's a very wise thing, even if you have an electric wired in horn on your boat, to have a canned air horn at the helm. So I've got one that lives in a cup holder on the fly bridge next to my helm station, just in case I need it and I grab that first, or my electrical system has gone wonky or something.
Okay.
So that's the requirement, is some kind of loud noise making system that can produce the required sound signals. Now, the required sound signals come in two kinds. Important to know the difference. There's a short and there's a prolonged, and they're about what they sound like. The short one is about 1 second in length. The prolonged is about 4 to 6 seconds in length. So, and it's combinations of one short, one prolonged, or combinations of prolongs and shorts together that make up all of these talk about.
Okay. So one of the places to start then is meeting and passing, and I think we've covered on this podcast the one and the two whistle.
Right.
But let's talk about that, and I think we've also covered how the phrasing we use on the radio, the one whistle and the two whistle,
Yeah.
actually stems from before there were radios. But give us the lowdown on meeting and passing and how we can use sound signals to arrange that, because it's not uncommon to encounter a recreational boat who perhaps is not answering on the VHF. And if you'd like to
Right.
arrange to meet or pass them, you may have to resort to the sound signals.
Yeah. So two things at work here. First is sound signals are required to be used when arranging safe meeting and passing. So this is the idea of we're bebopping along down the river system, and up ahead of us is a towboat pushing 1,000-foot string of barges full of gravel. How do we know that we're going to be able to safely pass this barge string? And does that towboat captain think we're going to be safer on his coming down his port side or coming down his starboard side? They generally have an opinion on that subject. And my experience is I care what that towboat captain's opinion is, because he spent
Absolutely.
way more time on this piece of the river than I have.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's really clear under the rules that it is completely acceptable and appropriate to have this safe meeting and passing conversation on the radio. That's under Inland Rule 34H. That if you reach an agreement on how to safely meet and pass on the radio, then you don't have to use sound signals. But let's talk about those sound signals, because that conversation on the radio with a towboat captain invariably happens in the language of those sound signals. What I found too is maybe a third of the time, the towboat captain would say something like, how about a one whistle pass? But then he'd say, yeah, come down my starboard side, because he doesn't know whether I know what a one whistle pass is or not, and he's just being careful. I would say also the flip side is really important. If you're talking to a towboat captain and he says, how about a one whistle pass? And you're not 100% certain what he means by that, say it out loud in plain language. I guarantee that towboat captain would prefer to have another 30 seconds worth of conversation with you to be crystal clear on what the meeting and passing arrangements is, and is not going to be upset, offended, anything that you wanted to be super clear on that arrangement. Okay, so let's talk about what those whistle signals are. So there are two of them. There's a one whistle and a two whistle, and it's real simple. Either one short blast on the horn or two short blasts on the horn. And I'm going to talk about them in the way the navigation rules, the inland navigation rules, talk about them. People sometimes get the idea that there's a one whistle side of the boat and a two whistle side of the boat, and nobody can figure out whether it's my boat or the other guy's boat and which side is which. And those are the wrong questions. So the navigation rules talk about, and this is in Rule 34A. The navigation rules say that a one whistle, a one short blast means my boat, intends to leave you, barge string, on my port side. This is always from the perspective of the faster, in the case of meeting and passing in a river, always from the perspective of the faster boat overtaking the barge string. So a one whistle pass means that the looper boat is going to leave the barge string on the looper boat's port side. Two whistle pass, two short blasts, so about 1 second each, means I'm going to leave you on my starboard side, and that would be the other way around. I'm going to do two short blasts on the horn, and then leave the barge string on my starboard side. Now, The nav rules say that inland rules say that the faster vessel coming up from behind proposes the meeting and passing, and the other guy signals agreement by giving the same signal in return. So I think we do this on the radio in the same sort of way. You have this conversation. The towboat captain says, "How about a two whistle pass, brother?" And I say back to him, "Got it. Two whistle pass. I'm going to leave you on my starboard side." That way I have echoed back. I have signaled my agreement that this is what we're going to do. If I say it out loud, that helps me keep it in my head, cement the idea in my head so I actually do the right thing, and gives the towboat captain the opportunity to say, "Whoa, that's not what I said." But it's real straightforward. One short blast on the horn means I'm going to leave you, other vessel, on my port side. If the other guy agrees, he should, if he knows the rules, echo back that same signal. We're going to talk in a minute a little bit more about the other signal that could happen here, which would be 5 or more short rapid blasts. That would be in disagreement. There's some important meanings about that. We'll talk about it in just a second. So one of the ways that I keep that straight, and I heard this visual picture described to me by a towboat captain at a meeting I was at, sponsored by the local Coast Guard Command, where they brought towboat captains and recreational boaters together for a Saturday morning to have conversation about how we can each share the waterway. And this towboat captain said, "Here's the way I keep it straight, and the way I tell, green hands on the boat how to think about this. Think about it like this. You're behind this barge string. And so the barge string is at 12 o'clock on the face of an analog clock. So the barge string is sitting there at the number 12. You're sitting in the center of the clock at that pivot point for the two hands. And so I'm the looper boat behind the barge string. And if I'm going to do a one whistle pass, I'm going to leave that barge string on my port side. That means I'm going to shift my boat towards 1 o'clock on the clock face as I come past that barge string. If I'm going to do a two whistle pass, it means I'm going to shift my boat towards 11 o'clock on the clock face. But think about that as two ones you add up to being two, or two single short blasts, or the Roman numeral 2, whichever way works best in your head. That's a really easy visual, picture to help you keep it straight. Works well for me, and I think it works for a lot of people.
Yeah, it works for me too. It's a great visual.
Yeah.
Works whether you are meeting or passing.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it, I think, very handy and convenient for
Yeah.
people who perhaps are not lifelong boaters to be able to
Exactly.
remember that.
So meeting head to head in some ways is easier because the navigation rules say both vessels have an obligation to shift off to the right. It's just like everybody in the U.S. drives on the right-hand side of the road, same idea. Both vessels have an equal obligation to shift off towards the side of the channel that's on their starboard side. And if you were going to have a one whistle, if you were going to have a one whistle pass, it's a one whistle pass from both vessels' perspective. It's exactly the same. Whether it's me in the looper boat or the towboat captain pushing the barge string, we're going to come down. We're going to leave each other on our respective port side. So it's the same either way.
Yeah. And in the rivers and tight spaces around curves, it's theoretically you could have if you ask a tow captain, where he'd like to see you, you could be meeting and he could say, "I'll see you on the 2," if he felt like there was more room there. We usually take their advice for it.
Yeah. And certainly in tight curves in the river, and certainly there are places in the Western River system where the river snags in very tight U or figure 8 shaped curves. A substantial barge string can occupy the entire width of the river as it comes through that curve. And so you want to have that conversation with the towboat captain earlier rather than later. To give the towboat captain the opportunity to say, it would be better if you held short. In fact, it'd be better if you went back up river just a little bit and let me swing all the way through because, I got this enormous string of barges today. Let's give each other plenty of room.
Right.
And I'm going to put in a quick plug for AIS, which I think materially improves safety for loopers, particularly in this kind of situation in the Western rivers, because not only can you see that, towboat pushing the barge string on your chart plotter or navigation app, if you have everything connected right, that data just shows up with a little moving icon for the tugboat. And if you have AIS transponder, so your boat is sending this data out, then that towboat captain sees your boat's icon on his chart plotter and he knows all about you. That's a
Yeah,
good thing.
it is.
We're really in favor of that.
Yeah. So we talked at the beginning, Rob, about how we don't see these sound signals in practice all that often among recreational vessels. The one whistle and the two whistle for arranging, meeting, and passing. It's pretty easy for loopers to understand the concept because most who have been out there encountering commercial traffic have spoken the words, have used the
Right.
concept at least over the VHF radio. However, maneuvering is a whole different story. I think a lot of new loopers who, this should be covered in your basic boating class, which you need a NASBLA certified course in order to legally do the Great Loop. We've talked about this here,
Yeah.
but the maneuvering rules are something that I don't see in practice,
Right.
even by loopers who know about it. So I want to jump into that. Let's take one quick moment and play a message from our sponsors. We'll come back and we'll jump into the maneuvering part of the sound signals. Back in a moment.
How unique is the new Portofino restaurant and events in Utica? Let's start with Utica's only waterfront dining. Inside has been beautifully remodeled into a 2-level dining experience. Choose upstairs for an open, airy, and inviting atmosphere with a beautiful view of the waterfront. For a quiet, intimate dinner, the downstairs ambience makes it the perfect dining spot. Both levels with the same great food, an exquisite menu prepared by our own executive chef. Reserve your dinner experience at portofinoutica.com.
Pebble Isle Marina is the perfect stop for AGLCA members to enjoy docktails, conveniently located in a sheltered harbor on the Tennessee River at mile marker 96. The marina's 600-plus feet of transient dockage offers slips convenient to all amenities and can accommodate boats of all styles and sizes up to 100 feet in length. Our fuel dock offers ethanol-free gas and high-speed diesel pumps with a ship store for supplies. Our floating seasonal restaurant offers beautiful views of Kentucky Lake from the patio. Check out the Pebble Isle website for details of special offers for AGLCA members. We're back on the Great Loop Radio podcast. My guest today is Rob Rice. He is filling us in on what all loopers should know about sound signals and how they should be used for safety as part of the rules of the road. So we left off, we were about to start on maneuvering. So give us the lowdown on what loopers really need to know and perhaps aren't using in practice on a regular basis.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about one that I think is incredibly important. You're unlikely to hear it, but if you do, it is really important that you know what it is. And that is a danger or doubt signal. And that one is 5 or more short, rapid blasts on the horn. You can find that in Inland Rule 32D as in Delta. And the thing here is if you ever hear that 5 or more short rapid blasts on the horn, the first thing that should happen is you, the guy in the looper boat, guy or gal in the looper boat, should snap instantly awake. Your head should be on a swivel and you should be asking yourself, who sounded that signal? Where am I in relationship to them? Am I the person who's blundering into danger, causing them to be worried? Or is it somebody else? And am I about to blunder into the same problem? So very unlikely you're going to hear it. But if you do, you need to know what it is so that you can be clued in that this is serious. You're only going to hear this if the other vessel is concerned that you're about to somebody is about to blunder into danger, or they can't figure out what you're doing, and they think there's a risk that you are going to blunder into danger. Either one. In either case, if you hear that 5 or more short rapid blasts on the horn, that's time to come instantly awake, figure out what's going on, make sure you're not the one causing the problem and that you're not going to be a contributor to the problem, whatever it is. So this one I think is really important. Unlikely to hear it, but if you do, you need to know what it is.
Yeah, and it is the kind of sound that gets your attention.
Yeah.
I think there is something about that is just inherent. When we hear that, everybody pays attention. Even if you didn't know what the five blasts meant,
Right.
You just naturally kind of look around and see what's going on.
Yeah, one of the problems for many recreational boaters is if you give them a sound signal, they think you're just harassing them, and they give you a rude hand signal back. They don't have any idea that there are meanings behind these sound signals. This one, I think the danger or doubt signal is really important.
Yeah. Tell us about the signal for nearing a bend or other area of restricted visibility.
Yeah, so this is an obstructed view signal. So the rule here, you can find it in 32E, Inland Rule 32E, and that is one prolonged, 4 to 6 seconds, one prolonged blast on the horn if you're approaching a bend in a narrow channel or river that has obstructed visibility. So this is a daytime signal, and it only applies where the obstructed visibility is sort of a problem. So in my home waters, there's coming out from Clear Lake, which is where the vast majority of the recreational marinas are, out into Galveston Bay, there is a U-shaped bend in the channel. And there are a couple of commercial vessels like dinner cruise boats kind of thing, and several very large power yachts and a couple of crazy big sailing catamarans, which are very consistent that when they approach that U bend in the channel, you can't see around it, absolutely cannot. And so they do give one prolonged blast on the horn, plus they're going to make an announcement on VHF radio channel 16. This is one of the dinner cruise boat is the Boardwalk Fantasy. Boardwalk Fantasy is approaching, I forget what the marker number is, the bend in the channel. We're really big, stay out of our way, that kind of thing. And so there's a conversation, there's an announcement on channel 16 with an invitation for anybody who's concerned to pipe up and talk to them on channel 16. And that raises a good point, right? Sound signals are great. Don't forget you also have a radio, and it's appropriate to use a radio as well. I can remember we chartered a boat from La Boat to go do part of the Rideau Canal before we bought our own boat. And in the piece of the Rideau we were on, we entered a narrow cut that had been chiseled by a bunch of guys in the 1800s with picks and shovels and dynamite through a very rocky piece of terrain. So it was a very narrow channel. And that was an area where the wise move was to make an announcement on VHF 16 that I'm entering this cut going south. Anybody out there, let me know, because we're going to have a hard time passing. It's so narrow.
There's a few spots on the loop that are similar to what you're describing, Rob, and I've heard some loopers recommend using the radio and calling a securite on that. Is that something that you've seen as well, and is that
Absolutely
similar to the one prolonged blast?
Same idea. So securite is a radio signal that says this is some important navigational information. This is not a distress, but this is important navigational information. In that piece of the Rideau, my radio announcement was, this is La Boat number 47. We're entering I forget the name of the cut, Rocky Cut, headed southbound. We occupy most of the channel. Anybody coming north, let me know. And that's kind of what it sounded like.
Yeah. Excellent. So let's go on to the next one. And I can hear this signal in my head because we stayed at Waterside Marina for several weeks during our spring rendezvous. And of course, commercial boats tend to use these sound signals more than the recreational vessels. And the ferry that goes between Norfolk and Tidewater goes back and forth right there. And it docks just off the recreational vessel marina. So we heard this multiple times a day. So go ahead and explain the coming off a dock or berth signal.
Yeah, so this one's under Inland Rule 34G, and that is a vessel coming off its dock or berth sounds one prolonged. Same sound signal as that obstructed view one, but a different context. So this one is the vessel is casting off its dock lines, coming off the dock, about to, get underway, and that's the heads up. Again, this is a place where a circumstance where a commercial vessel is quite likely to make a VHF radio announcement on channel 16. So the Boardwalk Fantasy dinner cruise guys in my area are very good about this. They give one prolonged and 3 shorts, and that's the next one. But they give these sound signals when they're coming off the dock, headed out to the bay, but they also make an announcement, this is Boardwalk Fantasy coming off our dock, headed out to the bay. Any concerned traffic calls back on channel 16. So coming off the dock is one prolonged. If they're going to back up off the dock, Then there's a separate sound signal for I have my engines in astern propulsion. That is, I've got reversed engines. It doesn't mean you're backing up. It means it means your engines are running in reverse. You could be bleeding off speed, but typically when you're coming off a dock, I'm going to back up at least a little bit to get away from the dock. And so Boardwalk Fantasy, this dinner cruise boat, they typically sound one prolonged plus three shorts when they're coming off the dock because they have to back up a little bit to kind of twist themselves off the dock and go and out into the channel. I think that's another one that's important to know what it is. For sure, that one prolonged in an area with a lot of other vessels with good visibility, that's your signal. Somebody's coming off the dock. I think that's important to know.
Yeah. So, and it's the one prolonged and three short that I can hear that the ferry there in Norfolk does, but you don't hear this happening from recreational vessels at marinas.
Rarely. So I think part of the answer is, of course, recreational boaters tend not to know about these rules. They tend to be lackadaisical about them. The other thing I would say is not every time you leave a marina are you in the kind of restricted view situation that requires one prolonged. So I can back out of my slip in my marina and I have complete view of all the slips around me and I can assess whether anybody's likely to be doing anything. I think it's a reasonable choice not to sound one prolonged and three shorts as I back up out of my slip. When I go down 100 feet and get ready to turn left in the fairway, I can inch up to that intersection, look both directions, and assess whether there's going to be any crossing traffic that would be a problem. And they'll be able to see me before I pull out into that crossing fairway to get down to the bay. I feel pretty confident that I'm not obligated to sound a signal. The other thing is, I think sometimes people think, yeah, I need to sound one or two whistles as a turn signal. The 1 and 2 whistle signals. So it is not the same thing as I'm going to turn left at this intersection. The 1 and 2 whistles are specific to I'm going to overtake a vessel in front of me, or I'm arranging a head-to-head meeting of a vessel in a narrow channel, or other meeting or crossing situations. It's not just a generic turn signal.
So let's go ahead. The last kind of area that we want to talk about these appropriate sound signals would be when there's restricted visibility. So go ahead and fill us in on those.
Yeah, so that's think of these as fog signals. That's the easiest, most common set of circumstances. So these would be daytime signals. There are a whole language of nighttime light signals that are a conversation for another day. These are daytime signals for restricted visibility, which is things like dense fog, mist, frog strangler of a rainstorm, Saharan dust storm, that sort of thing. So sort of environmental conditions that are causing restricted visibility during the daytime. But we can think about it as fog signal, and that's easy to think about. There's a bunch of these. I'm going to talk about the most common, and they kind of come together in a pattern. So a power-driven vessel that is underway, that is making progress through the water, sounds one prolonged blast every 2 minutes. So if what you hear is a long blast periodically on sort of a regular periodic schedule, that's a vessel someplace near you that is moving through the water in the same fog, in that fog. And so you need to be on the alert. The rules say that if you hear a fog signal, one of these restricted visibility signals, forward of your beam, so on the sort of front half of your vessel, and you're not completely clear where it is or where it's going, your obligation is to reduce your own boat speed to bare steerage way. That is the slowest speed at which you can control, of course, steering in the boat, which makes perfect sense. If I'm hearing a fog signal in front-ish of me and I don't know for sure where it is because it's crazy thick fog, I need to slow down so that I have plenty of reaction time if it turns out he's right in front of me and I just can't see him because of the fog. All right, so power-driven vessel making way, that is moving through the water, one prolonged blast every 2 minutes. A power-driven vessel underway but not making way. This is a power-driven vessel that is drifting, but not anchored, not tied up to a buoy, not tied up at a dock. It's in the water. It's sort of in progress in a transit, but it's not under power at the moment and drifting. That would be 2 prolonged blasts every 2 minutes. Again, long blasts every 2 minutes. That's a fog signal that tells you another vessel is out there. Okay, the next one is 1 prolonged and 2 shorts, and that's a vessel that is somehow restricted or hampered in its maneuverability. So that one applies to a variety of categories. A vessel not under command, and that has a technical meaning. That's a vessel that suffered like a steering equipment failure, or its engines are out, or it can't navigate as required through some equipment failure, not literally nobody on board. So a vessel not under command, some restriction in its ability to maneuver on the basis of the kind of work it is doing. That's restricted ability to maneuver. A sailing vessel under sail, a vessel engaged in commercial fishing, vessels engaged in towing or pushing. Any of those vessels sort of less maneuverable than just a plain old power-driven vessel. They're going to do 1 prolonged and 2 shorts, again, every 2 minutes. So if you're hearing some kind of horn signal in the deep fog about every 2 minutes, and at least part of it is at least 1 prolonged blast, that's some other vessel near you that you need to be figuring out, okay, where is this in relationship to me? And do I need to slow down significantly at this point? I also put a plug in here. The nav rules basically say that if you have radar, you have to use it. And so I think it's wise for loopers that have radar to spend some time figuring out how to use radar effectively and to understand what the display means and to interpret what you're seeing in front of you. Best time to do that, clear sunny day, when you can actually see everything around you and you can kind of match up the real world in front of you with what you're seeing on the radar display.
Yeah, that's great advice. It can be a little bit challenging to figure it out if you're waiting
It's
until you
not,
actually need
not
it.
super obvious, right?
Right.
Okay, so the other category that I think is important is a vessel anchored or aground. So they're required to give sound signals. This is a holdover. It's kind of a weird rule because it's a holdover from when the rule said that vessels over 12 meters had to have a bell. So the rule says, A, you have to make a bell signal. So if what you hear is a bunch of bell ringing, that's a large vessel anchored or run aground. The rule says that if you're under 20, now says, if you're under 20 meters, so under 65 feet, you don't have to make the bell signal, but you have to make some other efficient sound signal at intervals of not more than 2 minutes. So we're back to this periodic, rhythmic, 2-minute cycle sound signal being a warning of something in that deep fog. So those are the main ideas. I strongly encourage loopers to buy a copy of the Navigation Rules Handbook. You can get it from most marine supply places. You can order it off Amazon. We're going to have in the program notes a link to the web copy of it on the U.S. Coast Guard's website. And under the current Coast Guard regulations, it is permissible to carry the navigation rules as an electronic copy, as long as that electronic copy is locally downloaded, saved, and accessible without an internet connection. I think loopers are much better served by having the physical paperback book because it is so much easier to look stuff up, to study, and to just spend the occasional few moments as you think about something to just pick up the book and paw through it and find stuff and get out a highlighter. And I think it's just easier to learn from a physical paperback book rather than trying to do it purely electronically. The other thing we're going to put a link to is a short, quick guide to the nav rules, which includes a bunch of stuff in addition to sound signals. That's a quick 4-page quick summary guide produced by Woods Hole Oceaneering Institute, and a bunch of other people worked with them to do this. It's a couple of years old, but it's still, I think, pretty good. And for a quick summary guide to get you started into the ideas, I think it's the best thing I've seen as a short summary guide.
Great. That's really helpful. So we've got the links from Rob. We will put them in the episode description on the YouTube video. We'll put them in the episode notes on the audio podcast version. Rob, thanks for joining us and for sharing
Absolutely.
these. I do hear them out there. I think we've left the impression that a lot of recreational boaters don't know what they mean, and many do not. I think a lot of us try not to be boating on days when there's limited visibility. So things like the
Absolutely.
fog. But there have been days where we found ourselves in fog and did, do the prolonged blast every 2 minutes. And it's good to know what they mean. It can be
Right.
disconcerting if you're out there and hear them and don't know what
And
they
you
mean.
don't
So
know what
even
they
if
mean.
you're not using them yourselves, definitely encourage you to, take this to heart and learn them so you know what somebody else may be trying to tell you. So, Rob, thanks for
Absolutely.
bringing this all to light. And speaking of lights, we'll have to have you back to do one on the nav lights.
Okay.
But thank you for joining us. I appreciate you once again sharing all of this knowledge with us. Thanks to everyone who joined us and listened or watched today. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Great Loop Radio Podcast. Until then, safe cruising.